Hello, and welcome to Framing the Foundation podcast. I'm your host, Sid Torulkar. Today, we are excited to be speaking to Jennifer Stacey, who is the Chief Operating Officer at Beck Health. Jennifer, with 25 years of industry experience in leading in clinical research, data strategy, and optimizing delivery across healthcare and life sciences industry. She's had leadership roles previously at TriNext, Picnic Health, Viva Systems, and Sightline. She's really helped build and scale high-performing teams focused on clinical trial optimization, real-world data solutions, operational excellence. Currently at Beck Health, she's responsible for scaling their operations, accelerating clinical trial execution, and enhancing site and patient engagement to delivery, making it very meaningful for customers. With a strong foundation in data mining, port identification, file design, and technology delivery models, she brings a deep understanding on how to use this real-world evidence data and modern platforms to solve complex challenges in clinical research. She has led strategic engagements with over 100 pharmaceutical companies, CROs, and regulatory stakeholders, and is a respected voice in the industry. Jennifer has presented at global conferences, has pushed through leaderships on real-world data and real-world evidence, and continues to champion smarter, faster clinical trials to improve outcomes for patients. So very excited to have her on board to speak to us, and let's just dive right in. Hi, Jennifer. Thank you so much for joining today's Framing the Foundation podcast. I appreciate your time. I know we have rescheduled this a couple of times, and I keep saying this in every podcast that I drive in because the schedules don't match, but I'm glad we were able to carve some time. So welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here. I don't mind rescheduling because all our calendars are always in motion. It's a busy time in our industry. So I'm glad we were able to connect today.
Great. Thank you. I just, as I mentioned to the audience listening in or watching this video or podcast, is the wealth of experience that you bring in. So your introduction itself was pretty comprehensive, like 25 plus years of industry experience, working across multiple companies. I mean, I have notes here, so I'm looking at it because it's just too difficult to keep up with. But it's like, your experience in real world evidence, Viva Systems, it goes a long way. I think the longevity in the industry is critical. We don't see that quite often. People move through roles very quickly, but would love to hear about how your journey has been, some of the successes, challenges that you've come across. Feel free to share your background.
Sure. Well, thank you. Gosh, when you say 25 years, I made a pact to myself I would stop counting at 20, but here I am at 25 years.
Trying to keep reminding you of that.
No, it's okay. I still, I feel like I'm still early in my career. There's still so many things to do as we go.
Yeah.
But so that's some good longitudinal data, at least with my career. But I'm happy to share some of my past and then like where we're going. I think one thing that's maybe a little bit unique about myself is that, maybe it's not unique. I didn't start right in real world data, real world evidence coming out of college. And I had no idea what that was. I was always in the sciences, one of those kids who thought I'd be a doctor, but I had a great job offer to go to work at New England Biolabs, which became Cell Signaling Technology. So I spent my first 7 years of my career in the lab. So I had a lab bench, I had a tissue culture hood, and I was working on biomarker target discovery. So we made tools for those researchers to look for biomarkers. And this was back late 90s, early 2000s. So little, cell signaling spots and biomarkers like HER2 and PDL1 and EGFR were all just like, didn't mean anything to me too much then, but now it's cool to see it this many years as like really meaning something. There was tons of targets that didn't erupt to anything, but it's kind of a cool background. But knowing I wasn't meant to be in the lab forever, I kind of made the decision to just try to pivot into something else. And I didn't even know what that was going to be. And here I was in like 2007, and I responded to a job ad from Craigslist.
Oh, this is interesting.
Yes, it sounded interesting. It ended up being my job at Sightline. But I responded. I had to take some like analyst tests. I had a few interviews, everything on phone. There was no cameras yet, so I didn't even see anybody. And in 20 days, I had a job offer to be an analyst at Sightline. I didn't even know if it was a real job. I thought I might have been being scammed, but it ended up being a great move because I was able to now plunge into a vendor that was collecting data from all sorts of web sources and supported, and the clients were top pharma, small pharma, so the whole SMB to large pharma, CROs, and learning what they were doing with trials, phase 1 through 4, everything with that. And then we built what was now SiteTrove, so the PI and the site piece. So really getting into that clinical trial optimization piece and learning what pharma needed and how to support them and why this data was valuable that Sightline has and how to utilize it.
And this was back, what, 90?
In 2007 is when I pivoted and went to Sightline. Sightline, yeah, it was still very small, mostly Boston-based crew. So once a quarter, we'd get together in person. Great people, super smart, and I stayed there for 7 years. I learned a ton, and it was after 7 years, I was kind of starting to itch, looking for a little bit more. I don't know if I could have learned any. I guess I could have kept learning, but and then that's when I enjoyed Inventive Health Clinical. So a CRO kind of approached me. So it was actually someone who I worked with a lot supporting through Sightline and asked me to go over there to not only be a Sightline guru for them and using that data to help them with study planning and bid defenses, proposals, but then to use all the other data they had access to. So I was a true analyst now. I was an expert in the Sightline stuff, but now I had access to all other, like, some claims data and other EHR data.
Wow,
And
interesting. Yeah.
had to pull it together to do clinical informatic workbooks to help plan for studies and, how many sites we need, what countries do we need, what was the enrollment rate going to be. So it
I
was super fun.
I have to say that this is a very unique space. I think not a lot of people get exposure to this. So yeah, I'm feeling very jealous of you, Jennifer. Right? But this is great. Like very early in your career, get access and exposure to.
Yeah. And I got experience of being in a large CRO. So going from little Sightline, very remote, everyone was kind of at home working. You still would work at home at the CRO because it was global, but it was just so massive, so big, but
Yeah.
yet still supporting all the same clients that are similar ones I had at Sightline, just now in a different way and with more data. And it really opened my eyes of, wow, what we have and how cool it is, but then also where the gaps were.
Right.
What else could I have had? And that's what led me to move to Trinetics. So after a couple of years at the CRO, I got approached by a recruiter for this company, Trinetics. It was still very much in stealth mode, but what it was described to me sounded very fascinating. I was very intrigued. And truly, they were able to get patient data, so EHR data. They had the federated network, and having that data, that was the missing piece, or a huge missing piece of what I felt like I did not have in my role, and nobody had it at a CRO to help plan for studies. You could actually see where patient populations existed by site, and so going over to Trinetics, again, very early stage there, and helping build the clinical sciences and operations team. That was probably one of the best moves I think I made in my career. And I didn't even know what I was stepping into, quite honestly. I knew a little bit. I had no idea what it was going to do. And there was a great group of people there. We grew, scaled. We went from $0 to making lots, great revenue, got profitable, some M&A activities there. So I was there for 7.5 years and quite amazing. And that's where really the words like real world data and real world evidence came into play for me. I think the industry started using those terms more. And again, this is 2015, 2016 and climbing forward. And because we were first out at Trinetics doing clinical trial optimization, helping find patients at different sites. But then around 2018, we realized we were sitting on all this very valuable data
Yeah.
that he sold for real world data and helping support medical affairs and HEOR teams. HR data is rich with all those clinical details. You get labs with results, but you also get the diagnoses. And Trinetics had a lot of academic medical centers as part of its data network. So you got a lot of rare disease populations that were represented, appropriately, but significantly. But yeah, the data was valuable. So we started having a separate side of the business. It kind of forked to have, we could sell data sets and
Jennifer,
then
this
consulting
data,
the
yeah,
general.
sorry,
Yeah,
but this data, right? It's just for the listeners in. This is all de-identified data, so you don't have access to actual patient,
ex-
demographics, names, etc. So yeah, just want to make it out clear.
very, very good clarification. Trinetics especially, but all the PHI stayed behind the firewall at the healthcare organizations. They had access to that on their end with their technology, but at Trinetics and any of the pharma or CRO clients, de-identified. So if you could see patient populations by site, all the patient counts were obfuscated or rounded to the nearest 10. And that was, so everything was HIPAA compliant, GDFR compliant, Part 11 compliant. We took our patient privacy very seriously.
That's right. Thank you. I just wanted to bring it out there. Otherwise, we start getting questions like, what about patient confidentiality? And here you go. Everything was firewall.
Absolutely. And then once the data sets and we had it down to the patient level, that's when the patient's locations got removed.
Yeah.
And you still could never get a data set of less than 10 patients or all the regulatory requirements and the need to keep patient privacy. We always had data expert attestation to make sure the data sets were legit and ethical and appropriate for research use, but always protecting the patient.
That's great. Yeah. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there. Please
No, it's very
flow.
good clarification, a very important one too. So after, at Trinetics for so many years, and then I did take a little trip over to Viva, great big company,
Okay.
and was looking to evolve and dive into that like real world data kind of sector for clinical trial optimization. They're still thinking about it. They were, it's something that they were dabbling in. It was on the website. It's gotten pulled off. They're such a successful company. It was a great exposure. Again, a lot of the same clients, same pharma, CROs, but really, again, hearing from them what they wanted Viva to build to help them in the industry, because there's still missing things. Like there's so many people looking for solutions, and they still wanted even better ways to find the right sites, the right PIs for their trials, um, and ways of forecasting that these are the right sites and these are the right PIs.
Right.
And
Right.
that's something they're still, I think, working on and trying to decide if that's a space for Viva or not. But it could pair nicely with their CRM, their CTMS, their study startup. Um, they sit on a lot of data that could all connect. It could be really powerful, but I think they're still trying to figure out how to do that.
And again, Viva has pretty much captured the market right now. I think everywhere you go, you will find a Viva system
Yes.
integrated, which is amazing because I've seen the company grow probably 15 years ago. They really started,
Mhm.
getting their act together and trying to like go out and with an EDC system and then the quality management system. And now you find them everywhere.
Absolutely. I mean, ETMF was their thing, but they have so many great products. Their tech is great. They're a very strong company. It was great to be there and wear the orange for a little while. Yeah, it was a great experience. Again, more exposure, just more people and more realization of what the industry really needs and what everyone's working on to try to fulfill and move to that next step of where we need to go. And then lastly, well, actually from Viva, I was at Picnic Health for a short while, which another great company. I love what they're doing with their abstraction, and they retrieve data, they abstract it, and they can deliver it. And they're really moving into observational research, which is an awesome area. So again, patient privacy, but they actually get the patient consent. So that was the first time I was able to work with data in hand studies where the patients consented. Then it's a whole different game than when you're working with de-identified data. So I love watching where they're going. But I left Picnic and now I'm at Beck Health, and I'm really excited about Beck. It's still a very small company. There's only like about 20 of us there, but
That's
we're lean, but we're going to be mighty. And we have connections with EHR data, once again, de-identified, but this is community-based this time, kind of opposed to my Trinetics experience where it was very AMC heavy. And so now we're really focused on that community level of data
Mhm.
and bringing it over. We'll eventually bring it over to the pharmaceutical and the CRO side. But right now we're just working and building up the site networks and the data that we need. And I'm also there because got hired as COO there because helped me work on the real world data strategy alongside Dave and our CEO.
It appears that you have this historical background to come into companies that are small and trying to evolve and help build that structure in, which is amazing, Jennifer. I think that's where your experience and background, I think, would be a perfect fit for Beck Health. But yeah, but thank you so much for taking us through the background. I mean, I'm sure like as you were growing in your career, you must have faced challenges or areas where you felt like, okay, I need to pivot, make changes. Do you have any examples that you want to share?
Sure. I think one I touched on was like deciding to leave the lab and
Yeah.
find something new when I didn't exactly know what that new was. So, being brave, doing some research, finding things that interest you. I always think you're going to be best. When I say you, this could be any of our listeners here, at doing something that's really interesting to you, something you're really passionate about. If you start losing the passion, you're probably not going to be as strong at doing it. So find something you're really curious about and you want to spend your time. We spend a lot of our days, work days, and with work hours. So make them valuable, make them something you really enjoy doing. So plunging into this new market it was a little scary, but it was really fun and no regrets there. But then some other challenges I would say is, probably trying to educate others when you're doing something innovative. you don't have everyone on board. So you
Yeah,
have to be influential. You have to understand your audience and understand what they're doing, how they're thinking, and how to help them understand why this new innovation, this new way of doing things is going to be better for everyone. And I'll say one big challenge, and I think we might still face it, is a lot of people say they're innovative, but then are scared to do the innovation and
it's a good
execute
point.
on it.
Yeah.
And it's hard because to change things that we know and how we run trials or how we find sites or how we, do research, but embracing and trying some new things. And I've seen it happen, so it's great, but that's been always been a challenge. There's always some
Yeah.
sticklers who really don't want to change the way they're doing something, even if it could be more effective and more efficient.
I have faced that as well during my career as well. It's about comfort zones, right? We are so comfortable doing certain things a certain way that people hesitate to change that. And as a senior management person, I think it's our job to make sure that we drive people in that direction where eventually they become comfortable. But there's going to be a few elements or few periods of very uncomfortable time frame that they have to deal with. It's managing expectations. So that's a great point, Jennifer. And it goes back to your point as well, like, getting out of the comfort zone and taking a risk. Because unless you try, you don't know whether this is the right fit for you as well. I mean, you did that getting out of the lab. I knew that right after my master's that I didn't want to work in a lab. So it's something when you try, you realize that, that this is not the right fit for you, but you'll not get to that point until you try it out. So just dive in and give it a shot and then move on to the next one if it doesn't work to you.
Exactly.
Going back to the real world evidence, like help the audience understand like what is the concept, because there's a lot of real world evidence is thrown around like everywhere, but the early stage biotech companies don't have the data to really go that way. That's why the large companies kind of fall within this bracket. But would love to hear your thoughts on the what is real world evidence, what's the concept, what is the process, how it's.
Well, I think before we even talk about RWE or real world evidence, we probably should just define real world data, or we call
Okay.
it RWD. And that is data that we collect from just everyday healthcare encounters. This is not what's different about it is not the trial data. Like clinical trial data is captured because that is very much regulated. The patients are told when to go to appointments. They're told they're going to have this blood draw. It's following a very procedural, and there's a very we need clinical trials. We need it to be that way. We need to pick patients, but there's bias in that because it's a trial and there's like parameters around it. Whereas real world data is just data of people living their lives and their healthcare data
Right.
so when we generate real world evidence, we're using real world data, not clinical trial collected data. And then it's generating insights and you're finding things of how things are actually happening in the real world of healthcare. So it could be everything just from a natural history of disease, and you can see those progressions. You can look at today's outcomes. You can compare, you run a little Kaplan-Meier analysis of comparing the efficacy of two different drugs, and you can pick how you want to measure that. Maybe it's a lab value, maybe it's you're measuring mortality rates. And then, you can help like look going forward, like where drug, what treatment patterns different oncology patients are on and why they're switching drugs, why things are stopping. I think it's really useful. And I think also off-label use. I think that's another great place where real world data comes into play because you can use that to understand where else is this drug being used and is it beneficial?
Absolutely. That's a great point. There's a lot of off-label use that happens. Again, doesn't fall within the label specification, but that's where, I think biotech companies, or I would say large pharmas, can gather more information about, a legacy drug that's been used for years. Yeah, so that's great. Again, the concept, I think it's not very well understood. I think there are only a handful of companies that have actually evolved into, but what are your thoughts on how the industry is evolving?
And it is evolving and it's not an overnight evolution, and that's okay. I think it's good that there's being thought put behind it and where we can apply it. And real world evidence isn't going to replace clinical trials. It's not going to replace humans in any sort of particular way, but it is a great supplement to how and where we do things. It
Right.
can support your clinical trial. If you collect real world data and generate real world evidence on your clinical trial patients, you can have a nice underlying information of data, what else those patients are doing outside of the trial. Like you don't know when they went to an urgent care or these other things necessarily. So you can capture so much data very, I'll say easily compared to having to obtain it from each patient in a trial. But usually real world data is being thought of just independent. You don't know the patients. You don't need to, but you can have a much larger patient pool to study. You don't have to recruit patients as you can just define a cohort and pull the data together. You can tokenize real world data so you can link different sources to make it more robust, more complete. You have to be experienced enough in doing it so you find the right data. Not all data is fit for purpose. You have to understand what maybe it's claims that you need, maybe it's open claims, maybe it's closed claims, maybe EHR, maybe you want to connect some social determinants of health.
Right, right.
It's a huge space. So you really need to be pretty savvy in understanding what you're studying and what data can support that. But then there's so much that can be captured there that you maybe don't need in to do a phase 4
Yeah,
post-launch study.
yeah,
It could maybe replace that or at least be a good like arm or component. I think also, I mean, we've been talking about synthetic control arms for a long time.
right.
Really, like you could have patients, don't put them on placebo. You could have patients you just follow in their real world.
Just something I was thinking about while we were having this conversation, because a lot of these oncology studies have long-term survival follow-ups, and sometimes you have to keep the trial active to follow them through that. But that technically can fall under the RWE framework, where patients can go on living their lives because they're not on active drug, but you're following them up for survival. So I think this is something that could be just plugged in to really make it much more, again, cost efficient as well, I feel, because running a clinical trial at a site network or site is much more expensive than using the RWE at the back end.
Absolutely. And you're right, because those post-marketing commitments, or even maybe they're not even a trial, but the pharmaceutical company, they would want to know what's happening to those patients in the
Right.
1 month, 1 year, 5 years, 10 years as they leave the trial but stay on the drug. So that is valuable data. And if they could collect that consent to collect that data as that patient leaves, they don't have to keep the site open. And like you said, it's cost effective and they're collecting probably, I would think, better data than if they stayed and had to visit the site. You're not
Yeah.
as about attrition, because why they're not as likely to drop out because there's not a burden to them to have to do like site visits for themselves. So I always think real world data is a great supplement to help reduce site burden, patient burden. It's cost effective. And if you have the right situation and you pick the right data, it can be more robust than if you're just trying to collect something on your own.
Jennifer, is there like a large infrastructure required to really implement a real world evidence framework? In terms of like collecting this data from patients, processing it, and with AI coming in, do you see that field changing where there's much more optimization, cost effectiveness coming through? Love to get your thoughts there.
Yeah, so I say that's a big one. There's definitely, I think it's what data you're trying to do and how you're doing it. So I think my advice would be pick something and focus on it. Don't try to do it all because if you're trying to work with everything all at the same time, it will be difficult. So really, I think it's, you're pulling data in and you have to have an ontology. You want to harmonize data. So, and especially if we're getting into the unstructured notes, which we know that's where there's so much value in real world data is in those physician notes or those other sources. Maybe it's a lab report or a image report, some way that you can pull together all the data that you need in one structured format. And then it gets cleaned and so you can then be ready, analysis ready. It's an undertaking, but many companies are doing it. And, Beck is one of them. And it's an undertaking, but it's definitely doable. And now with AI, because you just mentioned that, it's making it, I think, that much easier, more effective, more efficient. So, like for example, at Beck, we're using NLP to go through and pull all those unstructured data. And so it's getting mapped into the structured data. So you don't have to query something different. And then NLP isn't perfect. It's AI. So there still needs to be some human verification, which still can be timely and a little bit challenging. So we're using large language models or LLMs
Yeah.
help verify what NLP is pulling to make sure it is true for that patient. All these different layers and AI is helping with like pulling the data together, getting those extra like valuable nuggets of data that are kind of buried and just aren't in the ICD-10 or a SNOMED
Right.
kind of
Right.
coded, or even it's like having the AI detect maybe a physician circled a yes or no on a form for
Right.
a patient and it knows what the question said and what the yes circle means. So those are the kind of things that AI can be super helpful in pulling in. But I think the LLMs paired with an NLP, it helps with just that accuracy and confirmation. And I still think there's always going to still be clinical expertise by a human involved and needed to verify even our AI just to make sure it is doing what it's supposed to do.
Yeah, and I believe in that. I feel that, as long as we are touching another human, the human element of is going to stay within the healthcare industry. It's not going away. Although health AI is trying to scare all the jobs away, and that's the narrative. I don't know. I'd love to hear your thoughts where you see, because I'm pretty sure companies are now started thinking about like, how do we evolve? How do we go from here so that we don't get left behind competition? At the same time, optimize everything.
Yeah, I do agree. I think AI has been and probably still continues to be a little bit scary to a lot of folks, but I think it's something, one, we all know we have to embrace it. It's not going away. It's not a fad that's just here, but it can really help support us. It can make us more efficient in how we do things. We can get things done faster. So instead of thinking of it as a replacement for clinical expertise and nurses that are like combing data, it just can make them so much better in doing their jobs faster and more rigorously, and we can get more done. And in my mind, we are trying, in my 25 years, we've been trying to move this industry and like get ahead. We know all these different places we need to go. We need to find more patients to match trials. We have I can tell you about all the gaps, but if we have something that can make us all work smarter and faster and more efficiently, let's embrace it and utilize it where it makes sense so we can get ahead faster. Then, and it's always been a slow evolution. And I think now we can evolve even faster.
Conversation. Time just flew by, Jennifer. Again, I want to thank you again for this fantastic conversation. I think real world evidence is then, I would say it's a game changer for the industry. Experienced professionals like yourself coming in and helping put some structure around is awesome. Thank you again for your time. For listeners listening in, I'll put in Jennifer's LinkedIn contact into the description. So do not hesitate to reach out to her if you have any questions. And we are here as well to help. Again, thank you so much, Jennifer, for your time.
Thank you, Sid. It was a pleasure to be here and happy to answer any questions, or I'm happy if anyone reaches out. So thank you again.
Great. Thank you.